How you doing? It is Austin Farrell here, and we're going to talk about psychosocial development and social emotional development. Now, right off the bat, you might notice that this is not an emaze production. Tried my best with that to import and do certain things with that, and it just wasn't working for me. So I had to resort to a PowerPoint slash Google Docs presentation. I hope that's acceptable. Doing the best with what I have. But without further ado, we're going to move on to the presentation then. So this is Eric Erickson's theories that we're going to discover here. We'll start with psychosocial development theory. Now, kind of all-encompassing, there are 8 stages that he posed, and so we're going to go from stage to stage, starting with 1 and ending with 8. And we're going to describe the crisis that's involved or this tension. Then we're going to describe the possible virtues it could produce or the negative outcomes it could produce. So in stage 1, the crisis or the tension is this trust versus mistrust. And so this occurs in the first year of life, and the crisis is the first of the stages, remember. And so babies are sort of uncertain of the world that they live in, and they look to their caregivers for this assurance and safety. Now, if they don't get that safety and that sustenance that they're looking for, babies will develop this negative outcome of suspicion naturally, which is just amazing that babies can kind of have that intuition this early in life, but they do, and vice versa. If they are cared for adequately and get everything they need in that safety, then they build this trust also, that manifests itself in hope is the virtue that's built there. And from there, we have the second stage. This is the crisis, or the tension is autonomy versus shame. And so this is in the second year of life. And so it's a stage that what you want to build is independence and a sense of self-will. And so if provided for correctly and if dealt with correctly, the child will build a healthy amount of autonomy, hopefully not too much. And then the negative outcome you can have is shame if they feel like they're failing too much or the child doesn't receive enough help during their mistakes of trying to be autonomous. And so throughout these stages, the video that we watched had a good explanation of you kind of want a little bit of both. You don't want you don't want shame really, but what you want is autonomy, and then sometimes helping them out, sometimes letting them fail and learn. In each stage, you want a little bit of each, just to balance it out. In stage 3, our crisis is initiative and guilt. And so between 3 and 5 years old, children experience this stage, and children want to feel more secure asking questions, and they're trying to initiate, they're trying to lead, and they're trying to build this virtue of purpose, basically. And if the child's overly criticized or they're constantly discouraged from asking questions, then they can feel guilt and might even feel just guilty asking questions, period, later on. They won't want to bring it up because they feel too guilty to even start off with. So you can see it's important as a teacher to just really allow students to ask their questions, even if it doesn't seem like the right time or even the right question. Then stage 4, we have this industry versus inferiority. It happens at age 6 through 12. And so children have a lot better self-esteem in this stage if the other stages are built correctly. And they develop this sense of pride of their own accomplishments and really of their own competence. And so if you recognize their efforts well, like putting the picture up on the refrigerator or that A+ spelling test on the refrigerator, then they feel industrious, they feel productive. Now, if the opposite is done, if it's not recognized, it's ignored, then children start to become inferior and they doubt themselves a ton more. And that will be very hurtful in the stages to come. Fifth, and possibly most importantly to Erickson, is the crisis of identity versus role confusion. And this happens in teenagers like 12 to 18. And body image plays a part in it, but the biggest thing is that teenagers are trying to build their identity and find their place. And you hear that so frequently in so many movies, like, where's my place? What's my role? Well, this is what they're trying to find. And the positive virtue, if they build on this correctly, is they can see themselves as unique and find their role, wherever it might be at their high school or any number of places. And the negative outcome, though, is if you don't figure out your role and you don't find your place and your uniqueness of where you fit, this can build confusion and then eventually rebellion, which a lot of parents know too well. So this is where they don't understand where they fit and then decide to rebel. In stage 6, the crisis here is intimacy versus isolation. So this is between ages 18 and 40, and you see so many times where adults are trying to seek that more permanent and long-term relationship. And so the ultimate virtue they're trying to get is love. And so the completion of this stage can lead to knowing what commitment is and care in a really healthy way. But failure to really get this concept early on can really lead to isolation from other people and also depression because they're not getting what they need. In stage 7, crisis is generativity versus stagnation. And this is what is often known as the midlife crisis. It happens in adults from ages 40 through 65, and adults develop the sense of being part of this larger scheme, this larger system, and so they want to give back through their careers and to the next generation. Essentially, they want to have a legacy to leave behind, and so they begin to develop that sense of care for others. And so failure, though, to deal with this stage healthily really generates what we call stagnation, or just that feeling of being stuck. It's like, I haven't produced anything. What am I doing? Where am I going? What should I do now? And that is the midlife crisis that so many experience. And the last of Erickson's stages is the crisis of integrity versus despair. And this happens when older people, 65 and older, are reflecting on their life, and they're thinking, they're either thinking with satisfaction or dissatisfaction. The satisfaction that produces wisdom and, thinking that I left this world a better place than when I found it, or the one that deals with despair, that they feel like they didn't know what they were doing with their life, and reflecting poorly on it. And so that is psychosocial development. Now we're going to move on to social emotional development. And so what this has to do is it's a series of processes inside people, and it involves the development of expression, of experience, and management. That one's really important, of one's own emotional and social part of life. So this would include the ability not only to create, but also maintain those healthy and positive relationships, how to keep it around and really develop a system of good relationships. And so this takes a good caregiver to really exemplify what that's supposed to look like. And so a responsive caregiver would be that nurturer who's an adult, and seeing that child gets everything they need in order to build that healthy social emotional development. And then we have this term that they use, affective, not to be confused with effective, but it has to do with mood, sensitivity, or attitude. So you'll often hear that probably in the literature of emotional and social development, affective. And so what children are trying to do, and what primary caregivers are trying to do, is build emotional security in their child. And that's where, just like in the first stage where they're trying to build trust, they provide they expect their parents or primary caregivers to provide that emotional security for them and that sense of safety in order to build hope. And lastly, we have some healthy traits of social emotional development. So these are kind of distinct markers. If your child or this person is building these traits, they are most likely on track to have healthy social and emotional development. The first is empathy. This develops shockingly early. It's actually in the 3rd year for most infants, and it includes the aptitude basically to try to put yourself in another's emotional state and experience that state in order to develop compassion. The second trait is temperament, and it's sort of this innate aspect. They've narrowed it down from what the research has said to an innate and not learned aspect of a person's personality. And it's usually characterized by something like introversion, extroversion, just the way a person is. It's their temperament. Kind of a difficult one to define. Next, we have self-efficacy, and it's a realization and self-awareness of one's own abilities. And so it's pertinent to their own competency in whatever setting or circumstance they're experiencing at the time. Next, you have emotional regulation, and it's kind of similar to homeostasis, but, just for emotions. You're trying to regulate between the highs and lows and find that nice middle ground. This comes through a lot of peer-to-peer interaction. And you need to be good at language and communicating, but sometimes culture also has to do with it, because some cultures expect more or less out of people depending on where you are. And lastly, we have the continued healthy traits of social emotional development. You got the sense of self, where you learn, where you know things like your own name. you know your own body parts, you know what your role is sort of in that other stage in the psychosocial of where you're supposed to be, and you're much more self-aware. Then you have impulse control, which is just self-control, trying to contain yourself during emotionally charged situations. And that also increases by peer-to-peer interaction. You know, when people bother you or bug you, you have to learn to show that temperament of containing yourself. And lastly, we have social understanding. So this is the ability, and it's kind of just has to do with conventional norms or mores that goes on in society, and being able to develop what that's like through peer-to-peer interaction, seeing how people interact with each other, and understanding, okay, how I interact day to day, how I am socially, what is that supposed to look like? So between the two of these theories, this is what you got. And it was really fun learning about this. So appreciate you for listening. Thanks for all you do.